Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and depending on where the world you are joining us from. Welcome to our 24th episode of Lead Strong. My name is Helen Floyd. I'm one of the directors of our talent practice here at Capfinity, and my specialist area is in leadership and talent assessments. At Capfinity, we have offices in the US, Australia, and the UK. We are the leading experts in strengths-based assessment and development, supporting organisations to deploy that philosophy from apprentice level all the way up to board level. And delighted to be here again with another fascinating episode looking specifically today at psychological safety. Steph, we can't wait for this one, can we?
Yeah, really looking forward to it. I'm Steph Hopper. I'm the other director of the talent practice, and my area of specialty is leadership and talent development as opposed to assessment, which is Celine's bag. We've got two brilliant guests joining us today. I'm thrilled that we've got them here. Let's start by some introductions. So Helen, I'm wondering whether you'd like to start us off. Tell us a bit about yourself, your career, and I guess why you're passionate about the topic of leadership.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, and it's great to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting me. So I'm Helen Jewell. I'm the Global Director of Research for Fundamental Equities at BlackRock. So looking at different companies and assessing the value within them. And I started my career kind of over 20 years ago, actually as an investment banker. And I did investment banking for a few years before realizing that wasn't what I wanted to do, and actually switched into training. I worked for a training company called BPP for a few years and loved it, loved talking about equity valuation and the markets, and actually did a lot of training in-house at Goldman Sachs, and through that moved into equity research, and that's when I found what I loved. And I love the markets. I love thinking about how companies fit in within the markets, and 7 years ago moved across to BlackRock, and it links into why I'm very passionate about leadership. Two reasons. Firstly, it took me a little bit of time to find what I was really passionate about. I did a maths degree and it was all about banking and accounting. And so I'm really passionate about trying to help people find what they love, perhaps a little bit sooner than it took me. I landed in the end, so I know for which I'm eternally grateful, but really helping them identify that, because if you find what you love, you've got longevity in your career. There's no doubt about it. And navigating how that might work with other things going in your life, maybe family, whatever, if you're passionate about what you love. So I'm really passionate about that. And secondly, I'm incredibly lucky in my career to have fantastic mentors who really guided me through difficult transition periods. And I know it's such a trite way of putting it, but that giving back is really important to me. So the second reason is just to be fortunate enough to share some of the things that I've learned along the way.
Brilliant. Fantastic. I love that. And Nick is a former colleague of mine. I'm delighted to see him again. Been following his journey to Denmark on LinkedIn. Nick, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and why you're also passionate about leadership.
Thanks so much, Stefan and Selena. It's great to be here today. So as we gather, my name is Nicholas Cresswell. Everyone calls me Nick, so please feel free to call me that as well. I work at Orsted, which is a leading renewable energy company that has an ambition to be the world's leading renewable energy major by 2030. We're headquartered out of Denmark, but have a rapidly expanding presence. We're currently around the world, currently in 13 markets and growing. And essentially, we have a very clear vision that we're all about creating a world that runs entirely on green energy. And what is so important to make that happen is if we're going to do that, we've got to make sure we've got the right people in the right place at the right time, doing the right things in the right way, so that we can be powered by talent. And to make that happen, it's super important that that talent is led well. That's where leadership comes in, because everything flows from strong leadership in the organization. Really importantly, strong leaders are the source of the culture of our organization. Like so many other organizations, we believe we have a very special culture, and we want to nurture that. We want to continue to evolve it. And that can only happen when leaders are leading effectively. I think to take it to a more personal level, as Helen just did as well, I've worked in a number of organizations through my career. I've been working about 25 years or so now. I started my career in a big food company doing graduate recruitment, went to Corn Ferry for a bit, did an MBA, was at Google for a few years, and then 9 very, very happy years at Thomson Reuters, where Steph and I worked together. And through that time, I've seen great leadership and I've seen awful leadership. And I've learned what impact that has on me personally. And when you're being well led, it's so energizing and exhilarating. And when you're being poorly led, it's quite debilitating and really impacts your life. So as I say, there's sort of a personal vested interest in making sure that we have the best leaders possible.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Nick and Helen. Wonderful to hear your backgrounds and, different industries, but a lot in common in terms of your areas of passion. So thank you for joining us. And actually, in your intros, you both touched upon this notion of culture and the impact of a leader. And this episode is looking at psychological safety. And Steph, we always joke that if we had £1 for every time that psychological safety has come up in these episodes, we haven't done many. We'd have enough money for a nice lunch, but we'd have some. Because it's a really prevalent topic and it's very important. And so we wanted to do an episode specifically around it to give it the airtime that it deserves. And we can't talk about it without referencing the research by Amy Edmondson, one of the pioneers in the space. I'm going to read her definition of psychological safety, just to remind us all around what we're really talking about here. Psychological safety being a shared belief that a team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. So a team climate categorized by trust, mutual respect, and a mutual respect in which people are comfortable being themselves. And I think that last sentence is really the core of what we're looking at here. If you have an organization or a team where there is psychological safety, people feel that they can be authentic, they can be themselves, and that is a safe place in which to do that. And there's lots of research, especially in recent years, that has proven the really strong predictive link between psychologically safe teams and then team effectiveness and ultimately success. So this isn't something that just feels good for an individual or for a team, for an organization. We know that it is linked to very hard commercial outcomes in terms of how organizations work. So an important topic on multiple levels. And I think one of the reasons why it is so pertinent and why it has kept coming up is because of, if we look at kind of post-COVID recovery and the impact on organisations and working, and especially with the move towards a more hybrid working environment, this becomes of even more interest. How does one create this psychologically safe culture and environment within the complexity of perhaps some more hybrid working? So that's definitely something that we'll want to touch on as we go through. And let's start there, actually, in terms of this hybrid piece specifically. Really interested in your perspectives, both of you, on how you think leaders can help to build a psychologically safe culture in this new hybrid working environment. So, Nick, I'll come to you first, perhaps, to give your take on that reasonably newer challenge that's facing people.
Well, I think the key thing to emphasize here is that it reinforces the need for the leader to have that direct personal connection to the people they lead. Yeah. And in a smaller context, that can mean really sort of close one-to-one relationships. But even in a bigger organization, that the leader actually needs to be able to relate to at least small groups of individuals, if not individuals themselves. And so they need to invest even more time in understanding people's context, not just the work they're doing, and that is really key, and what's going well and where the challenges are and so on, but also all the other things going on well, not all the other things, but many other things going on in their lives, particularly when it comes to how they're going to show up at work. So, for instance, understanding, one thing that we have spent a lot of time reminding our managers to do is, when you're managing a team in multiple cities, let alone countries, understand what does the situation with a lockdown look like in your particular city or country, because actually that can vary so much. And one of the issues we had early on, when after first or second waves of COVID and so on, was some cities would go back to normal and others would stay very disrupted. And actually managers needed to understand the context of what was going on. And that means investing even more time in conversations, even more time in dialogue, and really importantly, showing that you're listening, being curious with the team. So I think really focusing on those relationships and understanding the individual context is so important in the hybrid context.
Yeah, wonderful. Love that. Curiosity, listening, and taking the time. All really good tips. Helen, does that resonate with your kind of view of what leaders?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You've got to know your team. You've got to get to know them, know what really drives them, how they're kind of tackling and what they're tackling. We're all different in terms of how the pandemic has impacted us, both in terms of where you are geographically, maybe your personal circumstances, if you live alone, if you have a family. All these things have kind of played a role in how it dealt with you. And it's been 2 years now. It's incredible when you think about that. And I have someone in my team who's in Hong Kong, and there again, they're kind of tackling with things very different. I have to be very conscious that we're in London, and I'm not there kind of like talking about the fact that I had a great weekend, because things are getting very, very slowly back to normal here, or rather quickly in some ways. And I think there was some tips. I loved what Nick said earlier about learning what great leaders do and kind of thinking about those kind of things. There was a manager of mine actually kind of who shared his calendar. It was somebody I worked with a few years ago. And it was such a simple thing to share the calendar, but it made such a difference, because it felt that he was just saying, look, this is what I'm up to. And maybe the odd meeting, it would be blocked out because it would be with HR and he didn't want everyone to know. But everything else, it would just say private, but everything else, it was there. And that's what I've really done. I've always tried to do that anyway. But in the last couple of years, my diary would say, going out for a run. Blocked out that part of the calendar. Little secret. Maybe I wasn't always going for a run, but the team didn't need to know that. The point being is that I wasn't necessarily on. And I really wanted to say that this is how I'm dealing with this. I had children I was homeschooling, and it would block out homeschooling at this time, going for a run in this time. And I needed to show that I was doing the things that I was encouraging them to do as well. And again, that just came from something that I had seen someone do for me, which made a big difference in terms of how secure then I felt to really be doing it. Not because I was just being told, but I was seeing, my manager, my leader kind of do those things as well, because that makes a real difference to how people behave and react. And so could not agree more with Nick's point on really knowing the team, because I think the pandemic has been particularly personal in the way that people have reacted, and even two people who on paper in the same situation, the way that they have kind of dealt with it internally can be quite different. So understanding that, and then kind of doing a few of those things tangibly that can make a real difference. And another thing I try and do when I catch up with one of them, rather than always starting with a kind of, so what have you been up to? Telling them what I've been up to. Again, to just kind of invite that vulnerability of, this is what I've been working on, and not make them feel like it's a kind of, always on them to kind of be pushing forward with what they're doing. So, to Nick's point, these are just things that have worked with me that I've just picked up on, because it's by watching kind of leaders that I admire and the things that they do that I try to develop a style that I think will hopefully work for my team as well.
Yeah, it's such a powerful point, Helen. And I think to reinforce what you're saying, there's also a point about making the implicit explicit. So if there's a certain practice that you're doing, like keeping your calendar open for that reason, I imagine what you're doing, Helen, then is telling people that you do that, and feel free to have a look. And this is why I'm sharing that with you, because I think sometimes as leaders, we can do things that are designed to help, but then we forget to tell people about that. And it's a simple thing for me. Like I love to do walking meetings, and I love to do Teams meetings as a walk and talk. And I make a point of telling people the reason I'm audio only and not on video is because I'm walking around Regent's Park at the moment, and that's because this is a good meeting to do that. And it's interesting how that sort of seems to resonate with people. So I think that point about making the implicit explicit is help built on that.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, really important. No, and I love this sense of transparency and role modeling, because what you're doing then is giving others permission to, as you said, be vulnerable and to be themselves and to show up in a way that feels very authentic to them. And just quickly, just on the specifics of new team members, because I think we've seen that is particularly challenging, perhaps in a more hybrid world. What challenges have you experienced or seen specifically with new team members and building that trust with team members? Helen, back to you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really challenging. I haven't done it, and I can't imagine what it must feel like to start a new role in a pandemic and not kind of build those relationships face to face. So I think the most challenging thing that I've found is, people who don't know those people on the floor who are not in their direct day to day, but they're the people you bump into at the tea point and do those kind of conversations with. And at first, what I tried to do is those kind of like, I'll put time in their calendar, I'll set up half an hour with them. And that seemed like a really sensible idea because it kind of connected them. But half an hour with somebody who's not necessarily in your day-to-day workflow can actually be a little bit awkward. It's almost like you're both there going, oh, I wonder why Helen's kind of set this up. And I mean, I can talk to anyone for any amount of time, as you probably worked out. But for other people, it can be a bit nerve-wracking. And so kind of I tried to kind of change that a little bit to be, I tell you what, we'll do 5 minutes with them and I will be there too. So it would be a case of like, hey, Nick, I just wanted you to meet Celine. She's just joined the team and this is what she's up to. And I'm conscious you're not going to meet face to face for a while, but she's when we do finally get back to the office, she's going to be in the team, and I wanted her to be a familiar face. And it's just a very, very short thing, and I would be there facilitating that as well. So that's something which I'm very conscious of. How do you build those relationships? And as somebody involved in that, needing to take a much more proactive role in doing that when it's all being done virtually than I perhaps would otherwise have done. But it works both ways. Like, there's been a couple of people that I've met, as you can probably tell, that I'm now back in the office. And I saw someone today who I've met virtually. One of those people I've met so many times virtually, I forget that I've not met in person. And so I met him for the first time today. I had no idea how tall he was. So the first thing I was, and he said, I know what you're thinking. And it was kind of that, it kind of broke the ice. So fantastic. And what it made me realize is I need to just kind of think to myself, who are those people I've been working with day to day because they've joined maybe 2 years ago. And I've spoken with a lot, but I've never met them. And I now want to go and seek them out. So it just gave me a little thing that I'm going to try and do as well, in terms of spending that bit of time. Who are those people who I've met virtually? And I need to, they're not necessarily my team, but as a leader at BlackRock, who I want to kind of go and, again, making the onus on me to go and search out them rather than the other way around. So that's a kind of challenge, I think, is a real challenge, and ways I've tried to navigate it, and hopefully it's worked. Only time will tell as we all start to hopefully come back together.
Perfect. And Nick, does that resonate with things that you've found or seen?
It does. I think the most challenging thing here is to listen really intently to what people are actually telling you, because of course everybody, particularly if you're British, but it's a default thing. If someone says you're okay, you say, yeah, I'm fine.
Yeah. And
then actually to get under the skin of that, because we have had, particularly for employees who've started with us, since everything sort of started going off a couple of years ago, and who have been mostly remote, we have had people who've had some quite big challenges. And actually, if we'd stopped to listen better to them earlier on, we collectively, but also their individual sort of people leader, might have been able to pick up on that. But the challenge is, we're all busier than ever, and we need to be so transactional about what we do, about is task X, Y, and Z happening, that we can gloss over the bit about and are you really okay, and finding ways to give people sort of permission to speak up and say when they're not doing so. So I think there's something about then making sure that individual conversations, those one-to-ones, you really do take the opportunity to get under the skin of what people are saying when you ask them how they are, but then also constantly, particularly when you're in a more senior leadership role, sending that message is okay not to be okay, and we are here for each other. And please, know that we're there for each other, but also be accountable as well. If you're not feeling good about things, seek out the right way for you to address that, whether it's your manager, your peer, the employee assistance program, or whatever else. Because I think we need to encourage people to speak up, and also set the expectation that they will as well if they're not feeling okay, because boy, it's challenging.
I think it's a really good point. And what I was reflecting on, Nick, is in something that I read, I don't know, maybe I think it's about 5 years ago. My dad died 4 years ago, and I knew it when he died because it sort of stuck in my mind. But Sheryl Sandberg, when her husband died very suddenly, wrote a kind of like a reaction to her grief in the first few weeks, and something in that really stayed with me, which I think is really useful for one-to-ones. Which was, she said, loads of people would say to her when people came back into the office, how are you? And she said, I wanted to say, I'm not great, really. My husband's dropped dead. I've got 2 children. I've got a big job. Like, what? Like, how do you answer that question? And actually, what she realised was if you just changed it to "How are you today?" it's a game changer. And I always try and remember that, especially with team members that I'm connecting with virtually, who maybe I know are having a difficult time. It just changes the frame of the question. And my dad talked about that in the final year of his life. How if people said, how are you today, you could answer it. You can't answer it if you're, how are you, when you've got maybe a terminal diagnosis and you're not very well. But I think it's just these subtle nuances that can make such a difference to the way we engage.
And I think there's also something I mentioned earlier about the signals that we send, but those can be so important as well as senior leaders. And when we think about particularly psychological safety, showing that we're not always okay as well, because you know what, we're human beings. We do have days where we feel overwhelmed and stressed or whatever else, and of course there's such a fine balance, because we need to inspire and engage and energize the teams that we lead, but they also need to see us as human beings as well. And I was really struck recently. I just did a post on LinkedIn without really, because I woke up one morning, I felt anxious, which unfortunate, that's not something I generally experience when I wake up, and I know a lot of people do sort of struggle with that, but I woke up and I did feel anxious, and I completely reformulated the way I started my day. I went for a good walk, I thought a bit, I put some good music on, and then I posted about it on LinkedIn to say this is how I felt much better. And I was really struck by how meaningful that was to many people who told me, both online and offline, that for someone in a senior position like mine to say, hey, I feel anxious too, really sort of resonated with them. And I was a little bit taken aback and surprised that. And I suppose it's a reminder that as leaders, the more you can show that you're human, that really helps other people own these things as well.
I think completely agree. I love that. How are you today, Steph? I think that's really important. And what I'm also very conscious of, it happened during particularly the start of the pandemic. I think it's happening now with everything that's sadly going on in Ukraine, is people will say, but I've got nothing to worry about, and I preface it, especially at the pandemic. People were saying, well, I've got a home and I've got a job, and I'm healthy and my family are healthy, so I feel guilty saying anything that isn't anything apart from positive. And again, I find it now, people are prefacing it. It's a given that we are all in very fortunate positions, but that doesn't mean that I'm asking about you as an individual. So we've kind of got this. Look, this isn't kind of relative, this is about you absolute as well. So that's something that I try and do. But how are you today? That's going to stay with me, Steph. That's brilliant.
Oh, good. Yeah, and I guess just we're running through this episode super fast, you two. One thing that I just wanted to touch on is we know that a positive team climate is a really important driver of psychological safety, and most likely to occur when leaders demonstrate supportive behaviours and also positively challenge their teams. So I'm just thinking, in terms of some of the things we've already talked about, is there anything else you would add that you've noticed are positive behaviours or actions that leaders you work with demonstrate, which really help to encourage this psychological safe environment? Anything else we've not already touched on? Nick, let me come to you first.
I'll build on the topic of curiosity. I think essentially having more questions than answers as a leader can be really powerful. And the questions that you ask of your team in the areas on which you choose to focus in terms of how they're doing and how we can make the workplace and their experience at work and their ability to have impact better can be so powerful. But not always having the answers, which is, I personally find really difficult, because I love to come up with answers to things. But actually then asking those great questions, getting a good discussion going about them, and then encouraging people to act upon them, I think can make a huge difference.
Brilliant. And Helen, any others that you want to throw in?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one thing we perhaps haven't touched on is, teams are almost like families. There are periods where it's not always positive, and different parts of the team are perhaps not getting on as well as they may have done. And I think what I always encourage is that trust and openness has to be on all elements. So if a member of my team comes and says, well, so-and-so isn't doing X, then my response is always, have you spoken to them about this? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not talking here, Steph, about anything which is kind of, more of a grievous type thing. I'm talking about the day-to-day work, on this person, they haven't done this side of things. Have you talked to them about it? Because often the answer will be no. And then if I get involved, then it's like, okay, then suddenly that tension becomes a lot greater because, you went and what can actually, if someone says, look, it's bothering me, you're not doing this, is there a reason? Can I help you? Can we get this sorted out? As if I wasn't involved at all, as if I didn't even know about it, is a much better way to resolve that kind of situation. And that team trust is really important. It's important when things are going very well and you celebrate all of those successes together and collectively as a team. But when there are those parts where somebody thinks, or maybe this person isn't doing what they need to do and it's impacting my ability to get my job done, that part of if someone comes and says they haven't done X or they're doing this or this is really bothering me, my first response, as I say, I think we all know as leaders as well, those ones where this wouldn't be appropriate, but where appropriate, have you spoken to them about it? And if they say no, I say, well, go and speak to them about it, find out what's going on. And if there is still something that I need to get involved in and resolve, then I will kind of obviously do that. But again, this is something that I learned from somebody who had exactly the same conversation with me about 15 years ago when I started my career kind of stepping into more of a leadership role. And I think that point of vulnerability is that Nick has talked to a lot is so important. I often say to my team, and they're like, well, you seem to often know more of the answers. And I say, I don't know all of the answers. I've just been around the block a little bit. My role at the moment, we're seeing a lot of volatility in the markets, but I've been around the block that I saw the financial crisis. I know how volatility works. And perhaps if you haven't, it can be quite nerve-wracking. So just reassuring people, it's not because you're an absolute genius who's got all of the answers. It's just perhaps the experience that you have means that you're able to build that. But yeah, that kind of, I'm hoping we've got a little bit of time, because I don't want to end on a negative part of things, but we have to recognise that in teams, there are parts as well that you have to help resolve those conflict issues.
Thank you.
And the trust is really important. It is that trust of, if I work with Nick and something's going on, I have to trust that he will talk to me about it. That's really, really important in any relationship, kind of work or otherwise.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant conversation about a really important topic. And what we've been looking at in this discussion is the role of a leader in creating psychologically safe teams and cultures. To summarise very quickly, for me, there were three key themes that stood out. The first is around, really listening and being curious and taking the time, for leaders to do that with their people. The second is around leaders really role modelling that authenticity and that vulnerability, and that being a very powerful thing for them to do, to really give others permission to also be authentic and also be vulnerable. And then thirdly, just around this notion of facilitating, dialogue. And Steph, you shared this idea of asking, how are you today, as opposed to how are you, as being a really powerful way of checking in with people. Very, very quickly, because we are short on time, we knew this would be a packed episode, but just a very short parting soundbite from each of you, your parting thoughts or reflections on all that we've discussed. Nick, coming to you first.
I'll come back to my earliest point. Make the implicit explicit.
Love that.
Be conscious about what you do to be vulnerable and authentic, and then share that explicitly with others.
Thank you, Nick. Helen.
Yeah, absolutely. Know your team, and perhaps most importantly, be the leader that you would like to be led by.
Yeah.
Love that. Perfect. Steph.
And I think there's something about the nuance that's needed if we're creating a psychologically safe environment. I thought Nick's example of the different lockdowns around the world and how we're all at different stages can't be understated. It's the same like parents in your team. There's also the people who would love to be parents and haven't successfully been parents. There's the people who wouldn't want children in their life if you paid them. You know, how do you create something that people can talk about, but that everyone feels included in and safe?
Yeah, wonderful. Back to inclusion. Love that. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who has listened. Thank you to our wonderful guests and to you, Steph. And we're back again in 2 weeks for our 25th episode, and we look forward to seeing you then. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Thank you.
Bye.